The small town of Throop, Texas, is a quiet and safe place where devout locals know each other and keep in touch. It's hard to imagine that a horrible crime could happen in such a place, but that's exactly what happened in August 2002. The very fact that such a crime was committed shocked the locals, but what the investigation revealed was even more shocking. The victim of this crime, Marla Dawn McKeown, was born on April 25, 1967 in Jefferson City, Texas. There is little information about Marla's childhood, but it is known that she was the daughter of Gene Macon and that she had a sister named Melanie. Marla was a beautiful girl with musical talent who eventually managed to become a gospel singer. During her time at Baylor University, she was the director of youth and religious music and was also involved in the production of a Texas musical for 3 seasons. At some point, Marla met a man named Michael Tabb, with whom she shared a devotion to God and eventually decided to share her life. Michael was also born in Texas, but was older than Marla. He was born on July 7, 1961. They were both ardent believers, which is not surprising given that Texas belongs to the so-called Bible Belt, a group of states whose population is characterized by conservative views and a deep Protestant faith. Michael was raised in the Christian faith, and perhaps it was because of this that he decided to become a pastor. He eventually found his calling by becoming a Navy chaplain. Michael and Marla married in 1998, and because of Michael's job, they had to constantly move from one military base to another. Each time the Tubb family arrived at a new location, Marla became involved in missionary work, enthusiastically helping the local congregations. Once when Michael was transferred again, this time to Japan, Marla took up language study so that she could practice her faith, demonstrating her commitment to the religion. 2 years after their wedding, on April 25, 2000, the couple had their firstborn son, whom they named Jonathan. Shortly thereafter, the family was moved to Camp Lejeune, a Navy base in Jacksonville, North Carolina. They were living there when Marla became pregnant again in late 2001. So, with a young child in their arms and expecting the arrival of their second, the couple decided it was time for them to change their lifestyle. They wanted to find a place where they could stay at all and where they could raise their children in the best possible conditions. In mid-2002, Mike was honorably discharged from the Navy and ran to lead the congregation of First United Methodist Church in the small town of Throop. The couple moved to town in June 2002. Barely had they settled in, Marla went into labor and was taken to the hospital. The couple's second child, whom they named David, was born on June 25th. During labor, Marla had some complications, and doctors had to give her a C-section to avoid serious problems. Thus, the woman stayed in the hospital for some time, and after discharge, she was prescribed bed rest at home, which could not be broken. These circumstances meant that she was unable to communicate with their new neighbors and to get to know her husband's environment during the first few weeks of their stay in Throop. At that time, there were about 1,100 residents in the neighborhood, and to a greater or lesser extent, they all knew each other. This was especially palpable among the members of the United Methodist Church, who also had high hopes for the new pastor and his wife. The truth was that once Marla was able to join in with her husband, she was, in the opinion of some residents, unable to find common ground with them. In the opinion of some of the residents, Marla did not seem to be suited to be the wife of the head of their church. The parishioners expected Marla to be warm and helpful, but she seemed cold and indifferent. This was their opinion from the beginning. The fact was that the congregation had cleaned and decorated the church as a welcoming gesture to the pastor and his family. But Marla didn't like the way it looked, and she let everyone know it directly and harshly. People found it offensive, and it put a damper on all subsequent communication between Marla and her neighbors. In fact, Michael was not received well either. Some said that the new pastor's vast knowledge and oratorical skills impressed them, while others said that the tone of his sermons and the way he spoke to the congregation was not what was expected of him. People noticed that Marla was very hard on her husband and often made complaints to him in public. A few people even saw her mistreating the pastor at various times. She could hit or yell at him. This apparently contradicted the opinion her relatives held of her. They described her as a pious woman who lit up a room with her mere presence. Donna Sliger, the wife of the pastor of the church Marla had attended since childhood, said in an interview that she confided to her that she was very anxious about moving to Throop and the responsibility she would have to the congregation. It is likely that the circumstances of her arrival at Throop and the desire to maintain the image of an ideal family in the eyes of the parishioners caused her to begin this new chapter of her life a little differently than she had envisioned. In fact, the Tubb family spent very little time in the new place, and so the locals didn't get a chance to get to know Marla better, for it wasn't long before a terrible tragedy occurred. It happened on August 5, 2002. At about 5:50 in the evening, 911 was called with a statement that had not been heard for some time by the Smith County Sheriff's Department, located in the village of Tyler. The person who contacted emergency services told the operator that a man, clearly injured and accompanied by his 2 young children, knocked on his door and told him that his wife was dead. The man was Pastor Michael. The operator asked to have Michael speak to him, and when he picked up the phone, the man told him in a shaky voice that someone had brutally beaten his wife. Michael said that he had been out with his oldest son, and when he returned to the parish house where his family lived, he saw that the door was ajar. When he entered his and Marla's bedroom, he saw her bloodied body on the floor. He knelt down in front of her, took her hand, and then immediately left the room. David, who was only 6 weeks old at the time, was lying safely in his crib. When police arrived on the scene, 35-year-old Marla's body was lying in a pool of blood next to her bed in the master bedroom. She had been beaten so badly that it was even difficult to identify her. Marla's death shocked even the authorities, as nothing like this had previously happened in Throop in the last 5 years. The overturned lamps and pictures in the room clearly indicated that a violent fight had taken place. Thus, authorities concluded that the woman had resisted. However, the crime bore little resemblance to a robbery. The door had not been broken into, and Marla had not been sexually assaulted. On the other hand, the police noticed that the scene had been cleaned up, and at first glance, they did not find an object that was used as a weapon. During a search of the house, experts found an overturned wooden table. This piece of furniture was missing a leg, which they did not find at the scene. A pathologist at the Southwest Dallas Forensic Institute said the table legs matched the shape of the object the perpetrator used to beat Marla. When detectives asked Michael about what happened, the man said that he had taken Jonathan, his oldest son, that day, and traveled with him to his parents' house in Tyler to spend time with them. After meeting his parents, they headed back, running a few errands along the way. Michael's parents confirmed the story. The police officers then, according to protocol, asked the pastor to surrender the clothes and shoes he had so they could send them for examination. The police also suggested that Michael take his children to a safe place until they learned some new information. The man had been cooperating with authorities all along, and although the husband becomes the prime suspect in such crimes, investigators had no reason to suspect Michael at the time. According to some sources, at first it was thought that it could have been a robbery gone wrong, but this hypothesis was soon disproved, as nothing was missing. While the investigation was going on, Marla's funeral took place. The woman was buried in Guth Cemetery in her hometown. Friends and family who attended the funeral later said that Michael looked deeply depressed. Sheriff Smith soon issued a press release summarizing the crime and the cause of Marla's death. Preliminary results from the Southwest Dallas Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that 35-year-old Marla died from severe blunt force trauma to her head and face. The blows she received to her face were so severe that her jaw was nearly shattered. It was difficult for authorities to move forward with the investigation because there was no evidence at the scene and the motive for the crime was unclear. Investigators soon began questioning. They interviewed parishioners of the church where Michael worked, as well as Marla's family and friends. Some said that Michael and Marla had often had disagreements recently, but in their opinion, these were the most common disputes related to moving and the birth of a child. However, on investigation, it turned out that the quarrels were much more serious and the pastor was not at all what he seemed at first glance. By talking to Melanie McKeown, Marla's sister, authorities discovered that the woman hated life in Throop, and her marriage to Michael was suffering because of the man's inappropriate attitude. After learning this information and beginning to investigate the matter, investigators discovered that Michael was leading a double life, It turned out that the man who preaches harsh sermons about how a believer should behave is at the same time an avid drinker and a frequent customer of nudist clubs. In addition, he would often disappear for days at a time, claiming he had to deal with issues related to his ministry, when in fact, he would go to a hotel and spend time with various women. Melanie said that Marla learned of the cheating on her husband's part when she found a brochure from one of the clubs in his pants pockets. Marla immediately asked her husband directly what it meant, and in response, Michael apologized and tried to justify himself by saying that he had taken the flyer from a parishioner during confession. But Marla didn't believe it. As a deeply religious woman, Michael's behavior seemed utterly shameful to Marla. Based on this information, detectives concluded that Marla may have threatened the pastor to expose him to church authorities and his parishioners. On the other hand, police discovered that a year before moving to Throop, the couple had lost a child to a miscarriage. Marla became pregnant again, but the woman shared with her close friends that she was concerned about some of the events happening in their family. As a result of all this, Michael was considered the prime suspect. The police called him in for a second interview to ask him about his relationship with his late wife and what had happened on August 5th. Michael repeated what he had said earlier, but he was also very calm, and this calmness made the police suspicious. The man did not look like a widower taking the death of his beloved wife hard. Captain Mike Losk of the Smith County Sheriff's Department said the pastor initially cooperated with detectives, but after a second interview, he refused to answer detectives' questions and hired an attorney. Mike's situation worsened when, a few days after Marla's death, he was spotted at one of the nudist clubs he frequented. With a new suspect in mind, investigators re-examined the crime scene and Michael's vehicle, and re-examined the entire case in search of new evidence to support the hypothesis. Using luminol analysis, detectives discovered the presence of blood on the back of the pastor's van, particularly in an area that appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned. Luminol analysis was also performed on Michael's shoes, which the man turned over to police at the beginning of the investigation. This is how investigators were able to detect traces of blood on the laces, which had apparently also been thoroughly cleaned before being handed over to police officers. Given Michael's account of approaching his wife after her death, it was normal for there to be traces of blood on the soles of the man's shoes. But the bloodstains on the top of the shoes contradicted the theory that the man arrived on the scene when his wife was already dead. With this evidence incriminating Michael, authorities issued an arrest warrant for the pastor on September 14th, August 2002. The arrest documents stated that Marla had been mentally and physically abused by Michael during the marriage. Johnny Bedingfield, a deputy Smith County supervisor, said Marla told friends she was thinking about leaving her husband, but authorities did not know if Michael knew of his wife's intentions. Later that day, Mike surrendered to authorities in the presence of his attorney, Buck Fils, but was released shortly thereafter after posting $50,000 bail. Afterward, the pastor took up residence at his parents' home in Tyler, Texas. Jonathan met periodically with his grandparents, while David remained in the care of a church member. Information about Michael's arrest caused a stir in the community. John Mayer Throop told the media that people were angry and disappointed. Former neighbors of the Tubb family from North Carolina were also shocked to hear the news. Mike's attorney soon contacted District Attorney J.A. King Jr. to discuss a possible plea deal. The parties came to an agreement in which Mike would plead responsible for his wife's death and would receive a sentence of 50 years in prison with the possibility of parole, along with life in prison. A hearing in the case was scheduled for May 14, 2003. On the scheduled day, Michael failed to show up for his hearing, and, due to his absence, authorities went to his family home to pick him up. His parents said he had gone out for a morning walk and did not return. At the same time, police received a report of a man being assaulted on the Tyler University campus. Upon arriving at the scene, the police realized that Michael was the victim of the attack. He assured that an unknown person attacked him with a sharp object. However, the man had no idea that there were witnesses who saw that he had self-inflicted injuries. The witness said that he saw Michael hide behind a tree and then throw the knife into the water. Because of this incident, the judge increased Mike's bail to $1 million and ordered that he be transferred to the county jail upon his discharge from the hospital because he had previously been released on bail and by this action violated his release. Because of defendant's attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions, the prosecution modified the original agreement and added 5 years to his sentence. Mike refused to accept these new terms and announced that he wanted to stand trial. The judge set the preliminary hearing for early August 2003 and the trial for August 25th of that year. The pastor's attorney informed the court that he would need more time to prepare the defendant's defense, and also announced his intentions to file a motion to change jurisdiction because of the extensive media coverage of the case. Following the hearing, the judge sent Michael to jail, posted a $1 million bond, and prohibited the parties involved from speaking to the media. The trial date was rescheduled, this time to September 29, 2003. On that day, the defendant appeared before the judge and accepted a plea bargain from the prosecution. After a short hearing, Michael Tabb was sentenced to 55 years in prison. On his way out of court, the defense attorney said that Mike accepted the deal to spare his family and his wife's relatives the hardship of the trial. He added that he supported his client's decision. Smith County Criminal District Attorney Matt Bingham said that they have never investigated a crime with this kind of brutality, which moreover was committed by a pastor. The prosecutor added that Michael never disclosed a motive for the crime. The state representative added that under Texas law, Mike would have to have served 27 years of his sentence to qualify for parole. At this point, Michael had already served 20 years of his sentence at Smith State Prison. When Michael and Marla moved to Throop, no one could have imagined that something so horrific could soon happen. Marla's murder shocked the people of the small town because they did not allow for the possibility that a seemingly quiet and educated man called to lead a religious assembly could be capable of the worst crime.